Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here or missed part 1, make sure to check that out first. The link is in the description below. In part 1, we saw Kakashi's ANBU mission take an unexpected twist when he crossed paths with a mysterious girl in the forest. And trust me, things are only getting crazier from here. Before we dive in, I'm still on a mission to reach 1,000 subscribers, and I'd love your help to get there. If you enjoy this content, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with your friends. Every bit of support helps more than you know. Also, a big shout out once again to zariah.kellie for writing this incredible story. Details are in the description and pinned comment. Now, let's continue Kakashi's wild adventure. Minato stood quietly, watching the interaction between Kakashi with a mix of surprise and a little admiration for the girl. He had seen Kakashi in every kind of situation imaginable, leading missions, making impossible decisions, and surviving more loss than anyone should endure. But this side of Kakashi? Gentle isn't exactly the word that comes to mind when people think of him. The moment the girl had woken in a panic, it was Kakashi who moved first, instinctively reaching out to calm her. That doesn't surprise me. Beneath all the stoicism and sharp edges, Kakashi had always had a deeply protective nature, even if it was buried under layers of indifference and duty. But then, the girl had backed away as though Kakashi was just another danger. And that had hurt him. He could see it in the way his shoulder had tensed. When she crawled toward Minato, something clenched in his chest, not for himself, but for Kakashi. And yet, Kakashi hadn't let it show. What truly surprised Minato was how Kakashi handled it after that. He didn't withdraw, didn't shut down like he might have done in the past. He didn't let the rejection crush him. Instead, he stayed close, waiting, watching, giving her the space she needed, but never giving up. When did he get this patient? Kakashi didn't try to take over when she came to Minato for comfort. He simply let her, staying nearby, ready, as though knowing she would need him eventually. And yet, Minato could see the way Kakashi was hurting beneath that mask. This is more than just compassion now. It made sense to him. Kakashi had spent his whole life watching people he cared about slip through his fingers. Obito, Rin, Tsukumo. They all trusted him. They all needed him. And in his mind, he failed them. And now this girl, small and fragile, felt betrayed by him and was pulling away. Minato's chest tightened at the thought. He's carrying them all, Obito, Rin, his father. This girl has become another reminder of what Kakashi fears the most, failing to protect the people he cares about. Minato could see it so clearly now. Kakashi's determination to reach the girl wasn't just about her. It was about trying to make amends for the past. He's trying to atone for all the people he thinks he failed. But there was something more. As Minato watched Kakashi, he realized that it wasn't just guilt driving him. He genuinely wants to connect with her. It was obvious when he purred. I'll admit, that surprised me. Kakashi, the proud, solitary figure who had always seemed so distant and aloof, was here now willing to show vulnerability, to connect with another person on a deeper level, was purring like one of his ninkin, all to reach a scared, confused girl. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe it. The thought almost made him smile, but the situation was too delicate for humor. Still, it had worked. Kakashi had always been good at understanding things. Whether it was jutsu, strategies, or complex theories, he could break them down effortlessly, mastering them with the kind of focus that made him a natural genius. But understanding people? I never really expected that to translate. And yet, now that Minato thought about it, it kind of made sense. The problem was, Kakashi often forgot to show the same understanding to himself. Kakashi had a way of seeing through the surface of things, and now here he is, purring in front of ANBU, trying to show this girl that it's safe. I bet he didn't expect that in his ANBU career review. Minato wondered if this was a new side of Kakashi that had always been there, hidden beneath his tough exterior. Or perhaps it was a result of his experiences, of the pain and loss he had endured. Whatever the reason, it was clear that Kakashi was changing, growing. As Minato watched Kakashi interact with the girl, he felt a sense of hope. Perhaps there was still a chance for healing. Perhaps Kakashi could finally find peace. Perhaps this girl could help him. Minato remained kneeling beside the girl, his calm blue eyes flicking between her and Kakashi. The girl was trembling, on the verge of breaking down, and as much as Minato wanted to offer her comfort, he knew there was only so much he could do. How did it come to this? Minato wondered, his gaze flickering over the masked ANBU operatives, his patience wearing thin. This should have never gone this far. Minato let out a slow breath, anger simmering beneath the surface. How could this happen under my watch? He hadn't even known the girl existed until Kakashi stumbled upon her. His ANBU, his village, had failed to inform him of the situation, and now a frightened child was caught in the crossfire, her trembling figure still tucked against Shiba. Minato clenched his fists subtly at his sides. ANBU should have reported everything to me immediately. He was Hokage, after all. Every major decision, especially those involving potential threats to the village, should have passed through his hands. His sharp blue eyes darted toward the interrogator, standing awkwardly to the side. And what was he thinking? Or is this more than just negligence? Minato's mind raced as he pieced together the oddities of the situation. Keeping me out of the loop, it feels deliberate. The only reason he even knew about her was because Kakashi had randomly encountered her in the streets. If not for that chance meeting, what would have happened with her? Root. The thought struck him with a cold clarity. Could Danzo have something to do with this? The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Danzo'd do anything if he thought it served the village, or more accurately, his twisted version of what was best for it. If Danzo's involved, Minato's gaze flicked to Tiger, who remained stoic, his stance just a little too rigid. Tiger's one of the more experienced ANBU, but his demeanor, and the interrogator, who hadn't met Minato's eyes once, was looking more and more uncomfortable as the seconds ticked by. This too, he slowly stood up. His voice was quiet but laced with a calm, controlled anger. This situation has been mishandled from the start. I should have been informed the moment she was brought into custody. Fox and Hawk exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable under his scrutiny. Tiger remained stoic, but Minato didn't miss the subtle shift in his posture. Tense, defensive. His eyes hardened as they landed on the interrogator, who still had the nerve to look indifferent, as though nothing was wrong. And you, protocol or not, you overstepped. This is not how we treat people, especially not children. The interrogator stiffened but said nothing, his face pale beneath Minato's scrutiny. He knows this is not protocol. He was taking orders. If Root is involved, Minato's suspicion deepened, the pieces of the puzzle slowly coming together in his mind. They have agents mixed with the normal troops. Agents that will not listen to me. With a steady breath, Minato straightened, his expression once again calm and resolute. We're done here for tonight. The girl will be relocated immediately. Minato turned to the others. I want a full report by morning. Everything. How she got here, who gave the orders, and every single decision made from the moment she was brought in. I want the truth on my desk. From each of you. Is that clear? As one, everyone in the room answered, yes, Hokage-sama. He straightened, his authority undeniable. She's under my protection from here on out. For tonight, she stays with me. Fox and Hawk exchanged a quick glance, clearly surprised by the decision, but neither objected. Even Tiger, who had been the most resistant, remained silent. It was clear that once the Hokage had spoken, the matter was settled. Minato turned back to Kakashi. He had already been staying at his home, keeping watch over Kushina during her pregnancy as part of his ANBU duties. You still have a mission, Kakashi. You'll be staying with me, as planned. You'll keep an eye on her as well? Kakashi straightened, his gaze locking with Minato's. Yes, Hokage-sama. Though his answer was immediate and professional, Minato could see the flicker of relief in Kakashi's eye. He could understand that relief. This whole situation with the girl felt off, and knowing these weren't his ANBU, he couldn't shake the nagging worry about what they might have already done to her. Had Root already sunk their claws into her? Minato's curiosity was now tinged with a growing fury. What has been done to this child? What secrets were being hidden from him? He needed answers, and he needed them now. Before we leave, Minato said, I want to see where she was first held. The interrogator visibly flinched at his words, his gaze darting nervously to the ground. Fox and Hawk both stiffened as well, but it was Tiger who spoke up, his tone even but cautious. Hokage-sama, I don't think. You weren't asked to think, Minato interrupted, his voice sharp but controlled. I want to see the place myself. Now, his tone sharp enough to cut through steel. I want to see the place myself. Now, his tone sharp enough to cut through steel. Minato glanced at Kakashi and then down at Shiba. "Kakashi, lend me Shiba to confirm the room," Minato said, his voice steady. "You go on ahead to Kushina with the girl. I'll meet you back at home." Kakashi hesitated, his eyes darting between Shiba and the girl, who had one trembling hand buried in the Ninken's fur. She wasn't letting go, her grip tight. Kakashi sighed softly. "Great. She's not letting go without a fight." "Understood, Hokage-sama," he replied, though his voice was lined with reluctance. Kakashi knelt beside the girl, Shiba wagging his tail, giving her a reassuring nuzzle. "Hey, I need to borrow Shiba for a little while," Kakashi said gently, his hand moving slowly to demonstrate the sign for together, then separated his hands. The girl's brows furrowed, confusion and fear flickering in her wide, green eyes. "Shiba will come back," Kakashi added, nodding to Shiba, who gave a low, soft whine and nudged the girl's hand with his nose, her grip on the Ninken tightening momentarily before she hesitantly let go, her hand shaking. That was easier than expected." Shiba stepped away, his tail brushing the girl's leg gently as he moved to Minato's side. "Maybe she understands more than I thought." The group began making their way through the narrow corridors of the tea building. The girl, now walking a few paces behind, stuck close to Kakashi, her small form dwarfed by the towering ANBU around her. Her eyes darted nervously around the unfamiliar surroundings, her grip on Kakashi's wrist tightening as they moved through the closing facility. When they arrived at an intersection, Kakashi instinctively turned towards the path leading to the exit, guiding the girl in the same direction. Minato, however, glanced at Tiger. "Tiger, accompany them," he ordered, a subtle edge to his tone. "No," Kakashi cut in, his voice firm and immediate, surprising even himself. "Why did I say that? Hawk should go with us." Minato raised an eyebrow, glancing between Kakashi and Tiger. It wasn't difficult to pick up on Kakashi's unease. Minato gave a small, approving nod. "All right, Hawk, go with them," he said, his tone calm, but the decision final. Hawk stepped forward, his silent presence offering some reassurance to Kakashi. Tiger didn't react at all. Kakashi continued talking toward the exit, Hawk trailing quietly behind them. They made their way through a few more corridors, the faint hum of flickering lights echoing in the silence. After a short distance, however, the girl was slowing down, her steps becoming more hesitant. He turned his head slightly and saw her casting quick, anxious glances behind her. "We're going this way," he said softly. The girl's eyes darted behind her, clearly torn. Is she still worried about Shiba? Thinking quickly, Kakashi mimicked Shiba with his hands, raising them to resemble paws as he tilted his head slightly, just like Shiba would do. It was a crude imitation of the Ninken, but it was enough to catch the girl's attention. "If anyone else gets a wind of this, I'll never live it down." She blinked at him, her confusion momentarily replaced by curiosity. Then, to his surprise, a small, light laugh escaped her, the sound soft but unmistakable. It was the first time he had heard anything close to laughter from her, and for a brief moment, the tension between them eased. A hint of relief softened her tense expression. Kakashi blinked, caught off guard. She laughed, his heart warmed slightly. He then made the sign for safety. "Shiba will be okay," he added gently. Despite the small moment of levity, the girl took a slow, deliberate step backward, her gaze shifting back to the corridor with a determined glint in her eyes. She reached down to Kakashi's wrist, her small fingers gripping him with renewed resolve, pulling him slightly. Kakashi frowned in confusion. Why does she want to go back? He had already told her Shiba would be fine, and she seemed to understand. But her persistence, she isn't going to let it go. With a sigh of resignation, Kakashi gave in. "All right," he murmured softly, his tone laced with curiosity. "Guess we'll follow her for now." He let her guide him, following her lead as she retraced their steps through the twisting corridors. How does she know where to go? Her grip on his wrist never loosened, her steps hesitant but determined. After several turns, they finally reached the others, who were now standing in front of a small iron door. She knew exactly the way. Minato stood at the front, his sharp blue eyes fixed on the door, while Shiba wagged his tail gently beside him. Minato turned towards Kakashi and lifted an eyebrow, to which Kakashi just shrugged. "I'm not sure yet," Kakashi said, his voice calm. He felt the girl tugging at his wrist again. There was an urgency in her movements now. She darted forward, reaching for Shiba. The Ninkin gave a soft, reassuring bark as she wrapped her arms around him and picked him up to her chest. Shiba wagged his tail softly, sensing her need for comfort. Kakashi didn't react, his attention on the girl who had let go of his wrist but stayed close. "Open it," Minato said to the interrogator, his tone commanding. The girl's eyes never left the door, her breath quickening as if bracing herself for what she would find on the other side. The interrogator fumbled slightly as he approached the door. "He smells nervous." The door creaked open slowly, revealing a dark, damp room inside. The girl hesitated for a moment, her breath quickening as she stared into the room. Then, with renewed resolve, she took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her eyes remained glued to the floor. Her steps were slow and cautious, as though the memories of this place weighed her down. She moved toward the back of the room, where a small, metal cabinet stood. She turned to look up at Minato with determined eyes. She held Shiba up to her head. Shiba scrambled up her small frame and perched himself on her head. He was still small enough to manage it, though his added weight made her stumble slightly. There was something endearing about the sight of the small dog perched like a crown on the girl's head. Cute, but Kakashi could see the tension in her small shoulders, the way her hands tightened into fists. With a decided nod, the girl pointed toward the cabinet, her resolve clear in the sharpness of her gesture. Without turning away from her, he called out to the interrogator. "Well, what are you waiting for?" The interrogator tensed, and though his expression remained carefully neutral, Kakashi smelt the faint increase in his scent, a mix of anxiety and hesitation. With a reluctant sigh, he shuffled toward the cabinet. There was a soft click as the lock disengaged. The girl immediately stepped forward, her small form darting past the interrogator with surprising speed. She wasted no time in opening one of the drawers before closing it tightly and opening the one under it. Her movements were frantic now, her small hands moving quickly as she searched for something. Behind her, the group saw Shiba slightly tense up when the girl opened the first drawer. "What?" She moved to the others and rifled through its contents, her small hands moving quickly and efficiently. In one of the drawers, she paused, pulling out a small, faded piece of fabric. She handed it to Shiba, who obediently took it in his mouth, his little tail wagging as she purred softly at him. It was a sound Kakashi thought meant something like, "Hold." She returned her focus to the drawer, shifting through more items, her hands brushing away things that clearly didn't interest her until, at last, she found what she had been looking for. Slowly, with a tenderness that seemed out of place for a child so young and wild, she withdrew a small clump. The entire room watched in silence as she held the object close to her chest, pressing it tightly with both hands as a soft, happy purr rumbled in her throat. It was the kind of sound that vibrated through the quiet, filling the space with a gentle warmth. She rocked slightly on her feet, her eyes closed for a brief moment as if lost in the comfort of whatever it was she had retrieved. Kakashi moved closer to her. "What is it?" he asked, his gaze lingering on the object she clutched so tightly. She just pressed the bundle tighter against herself, her purr deepening as she glanced between Minato and Kakashi, her way of saying, "This is mine." "Okay then, I am not touching that." Something told him she would bite him if he tried. She started to walk toward the door, her small frame still clutching the bundle protectively. As she passed by Kakashi, her fingers found his sleeve and tugged urgently, pulling him toward the exit. "Leave. Now." Kakashi allowed her to pull him along, his own curiosity and concern growing. He glanced over his shoulder at Minato, his eyes narrowing slightly as he tried to read the situation. Minato gave a small nod, signaling him to go. Just as they were crossing the threshold, Shiba looked at Minato. "It smells lightly of blood." "The cabinet," he muttered tensely. Minato's reaction was immediate, his entire body tensing as if an electric current had passed through him. His sharp blue eyes flicked toward the cabinet, narrowing with a cold, calculating edge. "Blood?" His hands clenched into fists, the muscles in his jaw tightening as he fought to keep his composure. Minato murmured quietly to Hawk, "Make sure they get to my house safely this time." Hawk gave a curt nod before stepping into the hallway. As soon as they were outside, the change in the girl was immediate. The tension in her shoulders relaxed, and her grip on Kakashi's sleeve loosened slightly. She wasn't tugging him forward in fear anymore. Now it was almost as if she was brimming with some kind of energy that Kakashi hadn't seen before. Her steps were quicker, her gaze sharper, and she even started looking around more curiously. Hawk, walking behind them, let out a soft chuckle. "Impressive," he said, his voice low but laced with surprise. "The way she led you out, she knew exactly where to go, didn't she?" Kakashi blinked, his mind briefly drifting to how she had tugged him through the labyrinth of corridors without hesitation. How did she do that? It didn't make sense for a child to navigate the building so easily, yet there she was, almost guiding him as though she knew the place by heart. He glanced down at her, still gripping his sleeve, now with a bit more confidence in her steps. "She's full of surprises." The girl stopped suddenly, her eyes locking onto Kakashi's. Without warning, she gestured with her hand, mimicking a running motion. Her face lit up with excitement as if she had just remembered something incredibly fun. Kakashi raised an eyebrow, already sensing what was coming. "No way. Does she want to run?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of amusement and disbelief. "You want to run again?" Her eyes sparkled, the faintest grin tugging at her lips as she nodded and mimicked his words. "Run?" She tilted her head slightly, the words sounding new and curious on her tongue. Kakashi couldn't help but chuckle softly, though part of him was wary. Running through the village at this hour? Not a great idea. But the look on her face was enough to make him feel bad for even considering saying no. "Yes, run," he confirmed, making the hand sign for it. Her eyes lit up even more as she mimicked the gesture, her fingers copying his movements with surprising accuracy. "Run, run," she repeated, her voice a little stronger now, her eagerness clear. But Kakashi couldn't just let her take off through the village, not with Hawk watching, and definitely not when they still needed to head back. "Maybe later," he added, shaking his head slightly. The girl's face fell instantly, her shoulders slumping in disappointment. She looked so dejected that Kakashi nearly reconsidered. "Great, now I feel like the bad guy." Shiba, still perched awkwardly on top of her head, held the fabric in his mouth like a proud prize, his tail wagging softly in rhythm with her steps. But the weight of the small dog, although not much, was starting to show in the girl's posture. Her neck tilted slightly as she continued walking, her shoulders hunching just a little more with each step. But just as quickly as the sadness appeared, it vanished. Her eyes suddenly gleamed with a new kind of excitement. She pointed ahead, then at a nearby tree, her expression practically begging for something. "She's like a puppy, all full of energy." Kakashi blinked. "Now what?" She pointed again, this time at the tree, then looked up at Kakashi expectantly. "Tree?" Kakashi ventured, tilting his head. "Is this some kind of game?" "Tree," she echoed, her voice full of wonder, as if she had just discovered something magical in the word. "Oh, I see." Kakashi felt a small smile tug at his lips. She wants to learn. The idea of teaching her words hadn't even crossed his mind until now, but she seemed eager, hungry for knowledge in a way that almost caught him off guard. The girl scanned their surroundings again, her gaze flicking over various objects before landing on the moon hanging low in the sky. She pointed at it with a look of determination. "Moon," Kakashi said, following her gaze. "Moon," she repeated softly, her eyes wide as she gazed up at the glowing orb above them. "She's soaking this up." Kakashi found himself strangely fascinated by how quickly she picked up on things. It wasn't just the words, it was how she paid attention, how focused she became once she decided to learn something. There was a quiet determination behind her curious nature, something that told him she wasn't just a frightened child. Hawk, who had been watching from a few paces behind, let out a low whistle. "She's picking this up faster than some genin I've trained," he said with a smirk behind his mask. "Hatake-sensei, you might have a prodigy on your hands." Kakashi shot him a look. "Hatake-sensei? Really?" The girl's excitement grew with each new word she learned. She pointed at a lamp, at the stones on the path, at anything that caught her eye, and each time, Kakashi would give her the word, and she would echo it back with a sense of accomplishment that seemed to brighten her entire demeanor. By now, Hawk was watching the exchange with quiet amusement. "She's like a sponge," he commented softly, glancing at Kakashi. "She's going to have you talking non-stop if you keep this up." His tone had that teasing edge. Kakashi nodded absently, still watching the girl as she gestured toward another object, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "She's fast," he agreed, though part of him wondered just how much she had already known before now. "She's more aware than I thought." As they continued toward Minato's house, the girl kept pointing at things, her pace quickening as though each word filled her with more energy. Kakashi found himself drawn into the strange rhythm of their walk, the steady exchange of words and repetitions. "This is kind of fun." Out of nowhere, she stopped dead in her tracks. Without a word, she reached up to the top of her head, where Shiba had been perched, and gently lifted the small ninkin off her head. She turned around and, without any warning, handed Shiba to Hawk. Hawk stared down at the ninkin, clearly caught off guard. Shiba, still holding the small piece of fabric in his mouth, growled lowly, clearly unimpressed with being passed off like a piece of luggage. Hawk raised an eyebrow, glancing at Kakashi as if to say, "Really?" Kakashi merely shrugged, silently amused by the whole exchange. Welcome to her craziness. The girl, now free of her canine companion, narrowed her eyes in concentration and reached for the fabric that Shiba had been holding. She took it back with a soft purr, as though reassuring Shiba that she still valued him. Then, with surprising precision, she started pulling her hair into a messy ponytail using the fabric as a makeshift hair tie. "Hair? This is the big emergency? I mean, okay." Her face was dead serious, as if this task required her utmost focus. Kakashi watched, both bewildered and impressed by how she'd suddenly decided to get practical. When she was satisfied with her handiwork, she turned back to Kakashi with that same determined look in her eyes. Her hands moved slowly, deliberately, as she formed the hand sign for home. "Home," she said, her voice clear and confident as she looked up at him expectantly, waiting for confirmation. Kakashi nodded, feeling a small swell of pride. "Yes, home," he confirmed, mirroring her hand sign. The girl's face brightened, her lips curving into a small smile, but she wasn't done yet. It was as though something clicked in her mind, and now she was determined to test herself. She moved on to the next word. She pointed at the nearby tree, then did a clumsy version of the hand sign Kakashi had used earlier for tree. "Tree," she said, her brows furrowed in concentration. Kakashi nodded again, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yes, tree." Hawk, who was still holding Shiba, who seemed less than thrilled about the whole situation, glanced down at the girl with amusement in his eyes. "She's making hand signs for everything now?" Hawk asked, a smirk forming behind his mask. "You really are turning her into a little ninja." Kakashi almost laughed, though he suppressed it. "Shinobi, she certainly has the focus for it." But what stood out to him most was how quickly she adapted. The girl, completely focused, ignored Hawk's comment and moved on to the next word. She gestured toward the rocks lining the path. This one seemed to stump her for a moment, as she tried to figure out what kind of hand sign could possibly represent rock. After a few false starts, she eventually settled on a simple tap of her fist against her palm. "Rog," she said, looking up at Kakashi once again for approval. Kakashi couldn't help but laugh softly. "Close enough." "Yes, rock." The girl smiled, satisfied with her progress, and continued her personal test. She repeated each word she had learned, following them with her makeshift hand signs. Sometimes she struggled, but each time she succeeded, her face would light up with pure joy. Kakashi watched her with a mix of amusement and admiration. "She's creating her own language," he thought, realizing how clever the girl truly was. "She might be more of a genius than I am." Shiba, who had finally resigned to his fate in Hawk's arms, let out a quiet huff, his eyes following the girl's every move. Hawk, noticing the little ninkin's annoyance, gave him a gentle pat on the head. "Don't worry, Shiba," Hawk said, his tone teasing. "Looks like you're off duty for now." Kakashi, catching the exchange, shot a glance at Hawk. "You know, Shiba doesn't take orders from just anyone." Hawk chuckled, glancing back at the ninkin in his arms. "I'll take my chances." The girl, oblivious to the banter behind her, continued her mini-review session, occasionally glancing at Kakashi for approval or correction. "Hawk may be right. I am gonna turn into a chatterbox." Each time, he responded with patience and encouragement, watching as her confidence grew with each new word. Finally, after she had gone through nearly all the words she had learned, the girl stopped, her eyes scanning Kakashi as if searching for something. Suddenly, she pointed to her head, fingers tugging slightly at the ends of her ponytail, then looking at Kakashi with a questioning gaze. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. "Hair?" he asked, reaching up to gently pat his own messy silver strands. Her eyes lit up, nodding quickly as if to say yes, that's it. She mimicked his motion, running her fingers through her own hair, clearly pleased with the new word, hair. But she wasn't done yet. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she fumbled with her hands, trying to communicate something more. She made the sign for moon, then for tree, and even let out a soft hum, her eyes darting between Kakashi and Shiba, who wiggled in Hawk's arms as if trying to help. That sounds like when my Ninkin likes something. Kakashi blinked, piecing together the strange mix of signs. Moon? Tree? Purring? What's she trying to say? He didn't have to think much more before Shiba answered for him. Beautiful. His expression was of pure confusion as he glanced back at her. Beautiful? Shiba let out a bark of agreement, and her face lit up with excitement, and she nodded enthusiastically. Beautiful? She echoed, her eyes gleaming with curiosity, which earned her an enthusiastic yeah from Shiba. Just as the word left his lips, Kakashi suddenly felt a shift behind him. Hawk was watching the entire interaction with a devilish grin forming beneath his mask, his eyes narrowing in amusement. He could already see where this was heading, and he was more than ready to enjoy the show. Before Kakashi could react, the girl pointed directly at him, her face lighting up with a soft smile. You. Hair. Beautiful, she declared, looking pleased with herself for stringing the sentence together. Kakashi felt his entire soul short-circuit. Wait, what? His brain screeched to a halt. Beautiful? My hair? He could feel the heat rising up his neck like a chakra surge gone wrong. His heart stuttered. His mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish out of water. His hands flailed for a split second before clamping to his sides. Abort. Abort. Hawk, on the other hand, couldn't hold it in. Pfft. A barely contained snort burst out from behind his mask, and that was it. Well, what? Kakashi spluttered, his voice coming out as a high-pitched squeak. Why am I malfunctioning? The blush spread even faster. He felt like his mask was about to catch on fire. He clutched the back of his neck, as if that would somehow stop the embarrassing redness from consuming him whole. Hawk let out an audible laugh this time, unable to keep it together any longer. Well, Hatake. Looks like you've got yourself an admirer, he teased, his voice practically bubbling over with amusement. Kakashi whipped his head toward Hawk, his eyes wide and horrified. That's not, he started, but Hawk raised his hands in mock surrender, still holding Shiba, clearly relishing every second of Kakashi's misery. Hey, no judgment, Hawk said, grinning like a Cheshire cat behind his mask. But I've gotta say, I've never heard anyone call your bedhead beautiful before. His voice was thick with barely contained laughter, and Shiba, in Hawk's arms, let out a small, amused huff, almost as if he was joining in on the fun. Meanwhile, the girl, completely oblivious to the emotional apocalypse she'd unleashed, simply stood there, her innocent smile beaming up at Kakashi like she'd just paid him the greatest compliment in the world. My hair? Kakashi's mind was spiraling out of control. Beautiful? Hair? My hair? Still bright red and now awkwardly scratching the back of his head like an absolute idiot, he managed to mutter, thanks, his voice barely louder than a whisper. Get it together, Kakashi. Hawks let out a loud, dramatic cough, which was clearly meant to cover another laugh. I'm never living this down. Kakashi could feel the heat from his blush intensifying again, to the point where it felt like his entire face was on fire. Great, now I'm a walking tomato. Groaning, Kakashi desperately tried to regain his composure. Let's just get to Minato's house, he grumbled, turning so fast he almost tripped over his own feet. He set off at a brisk pace, hoping to leave his embarrassment in the dust. I should avoid all human interactions from now on. Shiba let out a soft bark from Hawk's arms, which sounded suspiciously like a laugh. The girl, meanwhile, didn't miss a beat, quickly speeding up to catch up with Kakashi. She started humming to herself, casually glancing at the moon as if nothing out of the ordinary had just happened. Kakashi, still flustered beyond belief, reached up and patted his hair, his mind still replaying her words. Beautiful, huh? As soon as his hand made contact with his hair, he felt the blush creep back. Why am I like this? Hawk, who had been watching the entire scene unfold with endless amusement, let out a low chuckle. Careful, Hatake-sensei. If you get any redder, people might think you're coming down with something. Kakashi shot him a half-hearted glare, but he knew Hawk was enjoying this far too much to be intimidated. He could practically hear the smirk behind Hawk's mask. This is my life now. Forever teased about my beautiful hair. But as they continued walking, Kakashi couldn't help the small, soft smile that tugged at his lips. Maybe it's not so bad. The walk to Minato's house felt much longer than usual. Kakashi focused on the path ahead, trying to forget how heat raised on his neck at her compliment. Beside him, the girl hummed softly to herself, occasionally asking for a new word. He still answered diligently. She's like a sponge, but a cute, terrifyingly accurate sponge. Shiba, who had demanded to be let down earlier, was happily trotting along beside them, sometimes answering for him with a yipping, or giving her words he thought were important like play. As they neared Minato's house, Kakashi could feel his tension easing, though Hawk's teasing grin hadn't faded one bit. I can feel his amusement radiating from here. Before he could knock, the door creaked open, and Kushina stood at the entrance, her fiery red hair spilling over her shoulders and her hands firmly planted on her hips. Well, well, she said, her voice full of mock reprimand. Sneaking home late, Kakashi? Kakashi, still flustered from the events of the walk, scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. We got a bit delayed, he said, glancing down at the girl, who was now peeking up at Kushina with wide eyes. She had been so full of energy moments before. Now she was completely still, shrinking behind him. Before Kakashi could answer, Hawk, of course, couldn't resist jumping in. Forgive us, Kushina-san. We had to do an emergency stop to admire Hatake-sensei's gorgeous locks. His voice was laced with light teasing, making sure to emphasize the title. Kakashi shot Hawk a sharp glare. You're not helping, Hawk. Kushina, never one to pass up an opportunity to tease, raised an eyebrow with a smirk. Oh. But just as she was about to press further, her gaze shifted to the girl hiding behind Kakashi, her small hand gripping his sleeve. Kushina's teasing expression softened instantly, replaced by curiosity and warmth. And who's this little one? Kushina murmured, her voice taking on a gentler tone. The girl shrank further, her fingers tightening on Kakashi's sleeve, her lips moving slightly as if considering speaking but remaining silent. That's Hatake's student and aficionado of Kakashi's. Per her words, beautiful hair. Hawk answered with a smile on his voice. Kushina, catching the emphasis on beautiful hair, grinned. Beautiful hair, huh? Well, I always thought Kakashi had a certain flair, she teased, tossing a wink at Kakashi, who shot her a withering look. Flair? Flair? What is it with everyone in my hair today? Turning her attention back to the girl, Kushina knelt down slightly, her voice becoming soft but still playful. You've got good taste, little one. And you know? She leaned in as though sharing a big secret, her tone dropping to a mock whisper. I think I might have to agree with you on the hair thing. The girl, wide-eyed and not entirely sure what to make of the situation, moved, hiding completely behind Kakashi, gripping his sleeve tightly as if to disappear completely. Her cheeks puffed slightly, and she focused her gaze on Kushina's hands. Kushina noticed her reaction and quickly dialed back the teasing, her tone softening even more. Hey, it's okay, she said gently, reaching out but stopping just before touching the girl. You're safe here. I'm just teasing him, you know? Kakashi turned his head trying to look at the girl and nodded reassuringly. She's safe, he said quietly, his voice calm and steady. Kushina's like family. At Kakashi's words, Kushina's eyes flickered with warmth. That simple, honest statement from aloof Kakashi, calling her family, touched her deeply. A gentle smile spread across her face, a mix of pride and affection, as she realized how much that small admission meant coming from him. For a moment, the girl seemed to process what he said, and slowly, she stepped out from behind him, still staying close but no longer hiding. Her gaze flickered between Kushina and Kakashi, offering a small smile. Am I right to think that this cutie is the reason Minato left the house in a fury? Kushina said, returning the girl's smile. "Looks like there was some miscommunication. Hokage-sama is handling it," Hawk responded in his usual professional yet warm tone. Kushina's brow furrowed slightly, intrigued. "Miscommunication, huh?" She straightened up, brushing her fiery red hair back behind her shoulders. "Well, let's not just stand here in the doorway all night. You're in good hands now. Give me a few minutes, and you'll be eating the best ramen this side of Konoha." As they stepped inside, the girl remained glued to Kakashi's side, but the earlier wariness was beginning to fade. The warmth of Kushina's home, the soft glow of the lights, and the smell of food seemed to relax her. She took it all in, her eyes darting around the cozy space. "She is really curious." The girl took a tiny step closer to Kushina, her fingers still gripping Kakashi's sleeve. With her other hand, she pointed toward Shiba. "Don't worry, I'll whip up a bowl for Shiba too," Kushina said, amused. Shiba, ever the opportunist, barked happily, clearly pleased with the idea of a meal. Just as they were settling in, Hawk lingered near the door. "I'll stay out here and wait for Minato," he said, his tone casual, but with the familiar teasing edge Kakashi had grown accustomed to. "Oh, and Kakashi, don't forget to brush that beautiful hair of yours before bed." "Really? Again?" Kakashi sighed but didn't bother to respond, knowing it would only add fuel to Hawk's teasing fire. The girl, who had been quietly observing the interaction, suddenly picked up on the now familiar words hair and beautiful, which had been tossed around far too often for Kakashi's comfort. She blinked up at him, her brow furrowing as if processing the repeated teasing. Then, without warning, she spun around to face Hawk directly, her small form standing boldly between him and Kakashi. Kakashi blinked, feeling a slight unease creeping up. "Wait, what's she doing?" Then, out of nowhere, she pointed straight at him. "You rock." Hawk blinked, looking completely baffled. "Rock? Hi. You rock," the girl repeated, her voice firm and confident. Kakashi froze. "Hi." He blinked, utterly surprised. "Where did she? I didn't teach her that." His mind raced, but the girl wasn't done. Before Hawk could respond, the girl continued, "You rock path," she said, her tone more playful now, a glint of mischief in her eyes as she pointed at the path in front of them and mimicked a small, kicking motion with her foot. A second of silence passed as Hawk processed what had just happened. "I'm a rock on a path?" His mouth opened, then closed, completely caught off guard by the playful jab. He blinked again. Did she just insult me? Shiba let out a low bark, clearly amused. Kushina, standing in the doorway, covered her mouth to stifle her laughter, her eyes shining with delight. Hearing her, Kakashi broke into a wide grin. Did she just compare Hawk to a rock you kick off the road? Oh, that's gold. He bit the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing, but his eyes betrayed him as they sparkled with amusement. She sure did, Kakashi muttered, half impressed, half amused. Where did she even come up with that? Kushina, standing in the doorway, burst into laughter. Oh my god, she said, clutching her stomach. Hawk, trying to recover from the unexpected insult, gave Kakashi a death glare. Kakashi shrugged innocently, the grin still firmly planted on his face. Hey, she's a quick learner. I just gave her the words. He glanced down at the girl, who beamed back up at him with pride. Seems like she's getting the hang of it. Hake gave a mock sigh, shaking his head dramatically. Well, I didn't see that one coming, he admitted, his voice tinged with amusement. A rock, on a path, kicked. I've been demoted to rock status by our little genius. As Hawk mulled over the situation, he noticed it has been years since someone had teased him, and a child no less. He felt an unusual mixture of amusement and surprise, and this little girl's nerve. She somehow learned how to tease from the few jabs he sent to Kakashi. Kakashi, trying to suppress his grin but failing miserably, shrugged. Looks like it. A very kickable rock, apparently. The girl watched his reaction, her gaze softening. Sensing his mock defeat, she did something that surprised everyone even more. With a gentle expression, she walked over to Hawk and, standing on her tiptoes, reached up and patted his arm, her hand small against his much larger frame. She patted him like she would console a dog, her touch light but deliberate and full with mirth. The gesture was so innocent, so childlike, that it caught Hawk completely off guard. His expression softened as he let out a laugh, a genuine, amused chuckle that filled the quiet night air. "All right, I'll take it. Rock I am. You're something else, kid." He bent down slightly and ruffled her hair, his tone warm. "No more teasing your sensei, Pebble." The girl's eyes gleamed with pride as she turned back to Kakashi, clearly enjoying herself. Kakashi gave her a closed-eyed smile. Kushina, still giggling, wiped an imaginary tear from her eye. This kid's got brains and a wicked sense of humor. Shiba, clearly entertained, wagged his tail as he circled Hawk's legs, almost as if he, too, was joining in on the fun. Hawk, his heart now thoroughly softened by the girl's actions, stood up again, still chuckling softly. "I didn't expect to be insulted and comforted in the same breath," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "She's really clever, using new words like that. She's sharp. Too sharp," Kakashi thought, feeling a strange sense of pride swell in his chest. Hawk lingered for a moment. He glanced at Kakashi one last time. "Looks like you've got yourself a little team now, Hatake. Try not to mess it up." Kakashi sighed, half exasperated but mostly amused. "Just wait outside, will you?" Kushina, still clearly entertained, opened the door wider. "Well, come on in. You've had a long day." And it looks like Hawk here's had his ego bruised. As they stepped further into the house, the door to Minato and Kushina's home closed softly behind them. The warmth from Kushina's home enveloped them, soft lantern light casting a gentle glow across the room. The girl's eyes were wide and darting around, taking in the space with a mix of curiosity and cautious wonder. Kushina was already moving toward the kitchen, her vibrant energy contagious as she called out over her shoulder, "You kids must be starving. Ramen's almost ready. You'll get a bowl so big, you won't need seconds." Shiba, with his nose already picking up the scent of something delicious, eagerly trotted after her, his little tail wagging in anticipation. Kakashi sighed. "I'll have to thank Kushina and Minato for even feeding my ninkin." Kakashi led the girl to the kitchen. With her amount of curiousness, she'll have a blast watching Kushina cook. As they stepped into the kitchen, the aroma of ramen filled the air, causing the girl to pause, her nose twitching curiously. She sniffed the air with a lot of intensity. That's right. This is probably the first time she smelled anything like this. The girl watched Kushina work, her eyes wide with interest, as if trying to understand every detail of what was happening. Kushina, sensing the girl's curiosity, turned and smiled warmly at her. "You like cooking, little one?" she asked gently, her tone inviting. The girl hesitated for a moment before pointing at the stove, her gaze flicking to Kakashi for help. Kakashi, sitting down at the table, leaned forward slightly. "She doesn't know how to talk yet," he explained softly, "but she's trying to learn." Kushina's eyes softened. "I see," she said, nodding in understanding. "Kakashi-sensei." She finished smirking. Kakashi ignored the teasing and leaned forward slightly, using simple words and hand signs, pointing to the stove and mimicking a stirring motion. "Cooking," he said, then pointed to the girl and made a big fake smile. "You like?" The girl watched him closely, her expression thoughtful. "Fire." She then pointed at some meat. "Cooking?" She's making her own connections now. Impressive. Kakashi nodded. "Yes, that's cooking too. This is called a pot," Kushina said, pointing at the large metal container simmering on the stove. The girl's eyes followed her finger, and she mimicked the word quietly, as if testing it out for herself. "Pot," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with determination. Kushina's smile widened, and she continued the lesson, pointing to various utensils and ingredients as she worked. "This is a ladle, and this is broth." Each time, the girl echoed the words, her voice growing a little stronger with each repetition. When the bowls were ready, Kakashi gently guided the girl to the table and sat down beside her. Kushina first brought out a bowl for Shiba, leaving it at the floor close to the table. Kushina placed a steaming bowl of ramen in front of the girl. "All right, dig in. This is gonna be the best meal you've ever had, guaranteed." The girl leaned in, sniffing the rich broth, her eyes narrowing slightly as she processed the unfamiliar scent. Then she simply stared at it. Kakashi raised an eyebrow, waiting to see what she would do. Is she going to eat it, or just keep staring at it? Kushina, who had been quietly observing her, noticed her curiosity and smiled. "Go ahead," she encouraged gently, nodding toward the ramen. The girl hesitated for a moment longer before reaching out with her small hands, tentatively grabbing a single noodle. But the moment she touched it, she yanked her hand back, her eyes widening in surprise as the hot broth stung her fingers. Despite the shock, she quickly blew on her fingers and then, more cautiously, tried again, this time with more success. Efficient and brave, Kakashi watched as she took a tentative bite, her eyes lighting up as the rich flavors hit her tongue. She likes it. Good. I'm not sure how I'd explain to Kushina that her cooking scared her off. Encouraged, she began eating more energetically, using her hands to scoop up the noodles and vegetables with increasing speed. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and Kushina couldn't help but laugh softly at the sight. Kushina didn't mind the drops of broth falling all around the table. In fact, she seemed delighted by the girl's unrestrained enthusiasm for the food. The room filled with the sounds of soft chewing and the occasional hum of approval from the girl. She's really going for it. But then, as the girl slurped another noodle, her gaze shifted to Kakashi and Kushina. Her eyes widened in surprise as she noticed that Kakashi's bowl was already half empty, and yet his mask was still on, and he was calmly chewing, as if nothing unusual had happened. Oh, she noticed. She blinked, her hands pausing midair, completely puzzled by how Kakashi had managed to eat so quickly without her noticing. She stared at him, trying to figure out his secret, but Kakashi just continued to chew nonchalantly, his visible eye crinkling slightly in what she could only assume was a smile. Just a ninja eating his ramen. Kakashi's got some tricks up his sleeve, huh? She teased, nudging him playfully. He's a master of the ninja art of stealth eating. The girl gazed at Kushina, but didn't catch any of her words except for eating. Her eyes then flicked between Kakashi's bowl and his mask, her brow furrowing in concentration as she tried to make sense of it. Calm. She's not going to figure it out. Nobody has. Kakashi, sensing her curiosity, finished chewing and gave her a small nod. It's a secret, he said quietly, his tone light, but with a hint of mischief. He then brought his hand to his lips and mimicked a zipping motion, his expression playful but gentle. The girl tilted her head slightly, still trying to understand what he was doing. She wasn't entirely sure what it meant. Woof. Shiba interrupted his eating to bark, and it seemed that was what the girl needed to understand what Kakashi was trying to say, as her eyes shined with recognition and she nodded at him. Her gaze then flickered to his hands. The girl then turned to Kushina and watched how she was eating. She noticed how they both held their chopsticks, deftly picking up noodles and other ingredients with ease. She stopped mid-slurp, her eyes narrowing in concentration as she studied their movements. Without warning, she dropped her noodle back into the bowl and grabbed the chopsticks beside her, determined to copy them. But as soon as she tried to hold the chopsticks, she realized her hands were slick with broth and bits of food. Kushina, noticing the girl's predicament, handed her a napkin with a warm smile. Here, wipe your hands with this. She then followed by cleaning her own hands so the girl could copy her. The girl took the napkin, hesitated for a moment, then carefully wiped her hands clean. She seemed to study the napkin, as if trying to understand its purpose, before setting it down neatly beside her bowl. Always observing, always learning. Once she was satisfied, she picked up the chopsticks again, this time with more confidence. She tried to mimic Kakashi's hold on them, but her fingers fumbled with the unfamiliar tools. Seeing her struggle, Kakashi leaned in slightly, showing her how he held his chopsticks, his movements slow and deliberate. Like this, he said softly, demonstrating the proper grip. The girl watched him intently, her eyes locked on his hands as she tried to mirror his actions. After a few attempts, she finally managed to pick up a noodle, her face lighting up with a mix of surprise and triumph. She looked up at Kakashi, her expression asking for confirmation. She learned it after just a few minutes, and without flying noodles, Kakashi gave her an approving nod, his eye crinkling with a smile. You got it, he said, again being gobsmacked by her cleverness. Maybe being surprised is going to be my new normal. They ate in comfortable silence, the only sounds being the clinking of bowls and the soft slurping of noodles. By the time she finished, it wasn't just her hands covered in broth, but her satisfied face as well. She used her newfound napkin skills to clean herself up, albeit a bit clumsily. She's got this whole eating thing down. Well, sort of. Kushina suddenly perked up with a mischievous grin. You know, I think I've got something else that'll make your night even better. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. More food? He asked, glancing down at the girl, who had finished her noodles with such gusto he wouldn't be surprised if she wasn't hungry anymore. Kushina winked, already heading toward the pantry. Not just any food, Kakashi. She returned with a small box, holding it up like it was a precious artifact. Opening it, she pulled out a few chocolate-covered sticks, offering one to the girl with a smile. Here, try this. You're going to love it. The girl eyed the thin stick with curiosity, hesitating for a moment before gingerly taking it from Kushina's hand. She inspected it from every angle, sniffed it cautiously, and then took a tentative nibble. The reaction was instantaneous and dramatic. Her eyes went as wide as saucers, and her whole body froze, as if she had just discovered a hidden treasure. Did she just find the meaning of life in a Pocky stick? Without any further hesitation, she took a bigger bite, her face lighting up with pure, unrestrained joy. She stared at the Pocky like it was the greatest thing she had ever tasted, the sweet chocolate and crunchy biscuit clearly blowing her mind. She quickly stuffed the rest of it into her mouth, her eyes darting to Kushina with an almost pleading look, as if asking, "More? Please?" Kushina chuckled, thoroughly amused by the girl's reaction. "I told you. Here, sweetie, have as many as you like." The girl wasted no time, eagerly grabbing another Pocky stick and devouring it with the same enthusiasm, her face a picture of absolute bliss. She even let out a soft, contented hum as she savored the taste. Okay, now she's obsessed. Great. How am I supposed to explain to her that there are other foods out there? Even Shiba seemed intrigued, watching with wide eyes as the girl polished off her third Pocky stick. The little dog let out a quiet whine, clearly hoping for a taste, but the girl gently shook her head, holding the stick up high as if saying, "This one's mine, sorry." Kakashi watched the scene unfold, trying to keep his usual cool demeanor, but a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Well, I guess Pocky's the key to her heart. Kushina stood up after everyone had finished eating, stretching her arms over her head with a satisfied sigh. "Well, now that we've had some food, how about a nice warm bath?" she offered, her tone bright as she smiled down at the girl. "Trust me, it's the perfect way to end the day. You'll feel refreshed." The girl blinked up at Kushina, tilting her head in confusion. She clearly didn't understand the word bath and just stared at Kushina, her expression a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. Right? She has no idea what that is. Shiba got her attention and took over here. Did he just seriously start cleaning himself as a cat? It worked though, and the girl nodded slowly, but as she stood up to follow Kushina, she turned and looked at Kakashi with big, pleading eyes, clearly wanting him to come along. Her gaze was so innocent, so full of trust, that Kakashi felt a pang of guilt for even thinking about leaving her alone with Kushina, despite knowing she was perfectly safe. "I do not think I am the best one to explain normal life for her." Kakashi shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the weight of her stare making him squirm. "Is she seriously expecting me to?" He cleared his throat, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly. I think Kushina can handle this one. I'll explain the bath and then leave, alright?" The girl's expression didn't change, her eyes still fixed on him as though she hadn't quite understood his reluctance. Kakashi sighed softly, knowing he couldn't just leave her hanging like that. "Great. Just great." Standing up, Kakashi gestured for the girl to follow Kushina, his steps slower than usual as they made their way down the hall to the bathroom. He could feel his face already starting to heat up at the prospect of having to explain everything in the bath. This is fine. It'll be quick. Explain, then I'm out." Kushina opened the door to the bathroom, revealing a warm, inviting space filled with steam from the running bathwater. The girl's gaze darted around, taking in the unfamiliar setting. Kakashi stepped inside hesitantly, trying to find the right words. The girl tilted her head, listening and watching intently, as if trying to grasp the concept. "Please let this be enough." But instead of responding verbally, she simply shrugged, then proceeded to pull her shirt off over her head, completely unfazed. Kakashi's eyes widened in pure, unfiltered panic. "What the?" He turned so fast he nearly crashed into the wall, his face flaming red. "Okay, I think that's enough explaining, he stammered, his voice an octave higher than usual. Why do I always end up in these situations? Behind him, he could hear Kushina trying not to laugh, the sound of her stifling her amusement filling the air. Kakashi, I've got this, she said, her tone both soothing and amused. Why don't you go ahead and wait outside? Kakashi, still red as a tomato, nodded furiously without turning around. Why yeah, okay. I'll wait outside, he stammered. Already halfway out the door, backing up without looking, Kakashi, his face still burning, leaned against the wall outside the bathroom, taking a deep breath to calm himself. She really has no concept of modesty. After all, who needs something like that in the forest? He shook his head, trying to shake off the embarrassment. As he finally exited the room, he let out a long, shaky breath, his heart still pounding. Note to self: avoid all situations that involve explaining baths. Forever. After the somewhat eventful bath, Kushina led the girl down the hall, her hand resting gently on her shoulder. Come on, let's get you settled in for the night, she said with a warm smile. They reached a small, cozy room with a futon already laid out and soft light filtering in from a small window. This is where you'll sleep tonight, Kushina explained, gesturing toward the bed. It's comfy, I promise. You'll sleep like a log. The girl, still quiet, walked into the room and examined the futon with curious eyes. She reached out, touching the blankets gingerly as though unsure of what to make of it. She turned to look at Kushina with a questioning expression. Kushina, sensing her hesitation, knelt down and patted the futon. See? Soft and warm. For sleeping. She then tilted her head to the side and closed her eyes, making an obnoxiously loud snore. The girl laughed and looked at her expectantly. Kushina, having seen this look during dinner, understood her. What's the word? Sleep, she gently answered. The girl repeated the words, sat down on the edge of the futon, fidgeting with the blankets, before giving Kushina a smile. Kushina gently ruffled the girl's hair, told her good night and left the room, leaving the door ajar. She lay down, pulling the blanket over herself, but her wide eyes remained open. She looked around the room, her gaze landing on the walls and the ceiling. The space felt too closed off, too different from what she was used to. After a few moments of restless shifting, the girl stood up, her bare feet padding softly across the wooden floor as she made her way out of the room. Silently, she wandered through the house until she found Kakashi, who was sitting alone on the porch, staring out at the night sky. Kakashi had stayed up, waiting for Minato to return, but now, even after talking to him, he found himself sitting on the porch, lost in his thoughts. Why is everything always so complicated? The cool night air brushed against his skin as he leaned back, his head resting against the railing and his hand absent-mindedly stroking Shiba's fur. The girl, unnoticed at first, quietly approached him. She stopped just behind him, tilting her head as she observed the way he sat in the dim light. When Kakashi finally realized she was there, he glanced over his shoulder. How long has she been standing there? Kakashi wondered, since he hadn't heard her nor feel her approach. What's this about? Can't sleep? He sat up, meeting her gaze, trying to figure out what was going through her mind. She stepped closer, looking around at the open sky, the cool breeze brushing past them, and then down at Kakashi, letting out a soft moon. Kakashi sighed, running a hand through his hair. Can't sleep inside, huh? He asked quietly, already knowing the answer, her eyes shifting toward the trees nearby. Of course. She's used to sleeping outside. Without another word, he stood up and stretched, motioning for her to follow him. The girl and Shiba followed him into the open yard outside Minato's house. The moonlight bathed everything in silver, the trees casting long shadows across the ground. Kakashi led her to a large tree near the fence, its trunk thick and sturdy, its the branches swaying gently in the breeze. As Kakashi settled against the tree, thinking the girl would soon drift off to sleep, he heard a sudden rustling sound. He opened his eye just in time to see the girl scaling the tree with an efficiency that startled him. She moved swiftly, her small hands and feet gripping the bark with a precision that seemed unnatural. Okay, that's not normal, Kakashi thought, his brows furrowing as he watched her climb higher. She reached a spot near the middle of the tree and stopped. For a moment, she crouched, seemingly assessing the various branches, and then, With a soft huff of frustration, she poked one of the larger branches as if disappointed it wasn't the right fit. Kakashi tilted his head, bemused by her odd behavior. What is she doing? Looking for a spot to nap? She huffed again, this time louder, clearly unhappy with her options. Finally, she placed her hand on the bark of the tree, her expression growing serious. Kakashi narrowed his eye as he watched her. What is she doing now? Kakashi's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. Wait, what is? Before he could fully grasp the situation, the tree responded. A faint rustling sound filled the air, and slowly, the thick branch the girl was standing on began to move. It shifted, almost as if it were alive, curling down slightly to form a sort of resting place that looked almost like an expensive wood bowl. The movement was subtle but unmistakable. The tree was bending to her will. Shiba sat on his butt, muzzle open completely in shock. Kakashi stood up, eyes wide with shock as he took a step back. What? He could barely get the words out. How did you? The girl, now standing on the new crib-looking formation, turned to face him, her expression calm and matter-of-fact, as if moving a tree was the most natural thing in the world. She tilted her head slightly, as if asking why they were so surprised. He blinked, struggling to process what he had just witnessed. Did she just make a tree move? This wasn't normal chakra control. It was something entirely different. Something he hadn't seen before. Her own chakra didn't even flutter. The girl, apparently satisfied with her new spot, settled down on the branch, laying her head against a small clump of leaves that had formed at one end of the bowl as if it were the softest pillow. She gave a small, content sigh, clearly pleased with her work, and glanced down at Kakashi as if to say, "See? This is better." The branch, now perfectly positioned for her comfort, cradled her as she closed her eyes. Kakashi, still stunned, stared up at her, his mind racing. What in the world? He shook his head slightly, leaning back against the trunk once more, trying to make sense of it all. That's definitely not normal. I think this isn't enough good reason to be surprised again. Kakashi jumped onto the branch beside her a long minute later and looked at her. What in the kami are you? But the girl didn't respond. She was deep asleep already, looking as if she was a part of the tree. Kakashi sighed, his initial surprise giving way to resignation. What kind of? Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye from the house. Kakashi's head turned, and there, staring out of a window, was Minato. The Hokage's face was barely visible, but Kakashi could see his eyes, wide as dinner plates, practically popping out of his head. Minato's usually calm and composed demeanor was nowhere to be found as he stared, his mouth slightly open in shock. Kakashi stared back, their gazes locking for a moment, both of them caught in mutual disbelief. Minato's mouth moved, trying to form words, but nothing came out. Are you seeing this too? Kakashi, still reeling, gave a slow nod. Yeah, I'm seeing it, all right. I just don't believe it. He raised his hands in a gesture of helplessness. I have no idea how or why this is happening. Minato's eyes darted back to the girl, who was now fast asleep on the branch. The Hokage blinked rapidly, then rubbed his eyes in disbelief. After a few more stunned moments, Minato shook his head and slowly retreated back from the window, disappearing from view. Guess I'll just keep an eye out, in case she decides to move an entire forest next. Well, at least she's comfortable now, Kakashi muttered to himself, shaking his head in disbelief. Kakashi sat and leaned against the trunk of the tree, keeping the girl on his view. What am I even dealing with here? He let a whistle escape his lips, which had Shiba jumping up beside him. Kakashi reached out and patted Shiba absent-mindedly, but the sound of Kakashi's whistle reached the girl's ears. Slowly, her eyes fluttered open, blinking sleepily. She looked at him, studied him for a second, then glanced around as if realizing something. Her eyes widened slightly, and her expression suddenly filled with guilt. She let out a small, sad purr. Is she apologizing? What for? Kakashi raised an eyebrow, surprised that she'd woken up. What? He muttered softly, more to himself than to her. He wasn't sure why she seemed upset. The girl pressed both of her palms onto the branch she was laying on, the same way she had done earlier. Kakashi watched, his eyes narrowing in confusion. She can't possibly be. Suddenly, the trunk he was leaning on shifted. No, she wouldn't. The wood groaned softly as it moved, bending in ways that a tree shouldn't naturally move. His eyes widened, and he instinctively leaned away, only to realize the tree was reshaping itself for him. Within moments, a perfect nook had formed, complete with a gently curving branch in front of him. It was almost as if the tree had formed a cradle specifically for Kakashi, as if inviting him to lean back. "Oh, for the love of," Kakashi sighed. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath, cautiously reaching out to touch the newly formed nook. It felt solid, sturdy, like it had always been that way. The rough bark had smoothed out, making it feel almost soft. He couldn't help but shake his head in disbelief. "So, now I've got my own personal tree bed. Great." But she wasn't finished yet. With a gentle rustle, leaves began to sprout from a thin branch in front of him. Kakashi stared in awe as the branch cradled him, its soft leaves forming a surprisingly comfortable cocoon, resembling a soft, leafy duvet. A branch duvet, made for me. The girl gave a soft, satisfied hum from above, clearly pleased with her handiwork. She looked down at Kakashi with those wide, curious eyes and gave him a small smile, like she was proud of herself for figuring out how to make him a sleeping spot. Kakashi sighed, not quite knowing how to feel about this development. He looked up at her, his gaze softening despite himself. "Thanks, I think." As he cautiously settled into the nook, testing the comfort, he found that it wasn't half bad. In fact, it was surprisingly comfortable. The branch supported his back perfectly, and the leaves rustled softly overhead, creating a calming, almost serene atmosphere. "She really made me a bed," he muttered under his breath, more confused than ever. The situation was far from normal. He tilted his head back to glance at the girl again, who was already half asleep again. She looked peaceful, completely unbothered by the strangeness of it all. Maybe to her, this is normal. Or maybe I'm just losing my grip on reality. Kakashi let out a long breath, allowing himself to relax as he leaned back against the tree. "Well, this is different, but I guess it beats sleeping on the ground." The branch cradled him comfortably, and for the first time in what felt like hours, he felt his body start to unwind. "I'll just accept it for now. Maybe this is a dream. No sense in figuring it out if I'm just gonna wake up." Kakashi felt his eyelids growing heavier as the odd comfort of the tree lulled him into relaxation. It was the best sleep he has had since he was 4. Minato had dealt with a lot in his still short time as Hokage. Rebuilding a village after the war, angry villagers, rogue ninjas, political disasters. But standing in front of that iron door at tea tonight, he couldn't shake the feeling that this could be the beginning of the biggest challenge of his Hokage time. He'd chosen to walk home, hoping the cool night air would help clear his head, but the peaceful glow of Konoha, bathed in starlight, seemed to mock his troubled mind, which kept circling back to the events at tea. When he opened the drawers of that cabinet, he half expected to find something horrific. Thank Kami, there were no instruments of torture, just syringes, probably where Shiba caught the scent of blood, and some old, fraying strips of clothing sewn with leaves. Hers maybe? The rest of the cabinet contained strange items, monitors, puzzles, cards, psychological tests, not interrogative tools. Minato sighed. They weren't trying to interrogate her, they were studying her. But why? What for? He had the girl's files tucked under his arm and planned to review them thoroughly, hoping the answer would be there. I doubt it. However, with the girl now under his roof, even with Kakashi watching over her, he didn't feel comfortable leaving Kushina, especially with the pregnancy. And his trust in ANBU was, let's say, on thin ice at the moment. Minato had known about the shadows in the village, the shinobi that operated in ethically gray areas, but this was something else. The thought of Root infiltrating his ANBU gnawed at him. He was not completely convinced on the necessity of Root, and he'd been planning to root them out for a while now, pun completely intended. But with the infiltration in tonight, the changes needed to come faster and on a much larger scale. Is this Root's doing? Is someone else's hand at play? I do not know what is worse. His house finally came into view, its dark shape a comforting presence against the night sky. The sight of it eased some of the tension in his shoulders. He was dying to see Kushina. As he neared the entrance, Hawk materialized in front of him, a shadow slipping out of the night. Minato wasn't startled. ANBU tended to have that effect, but his body tensed automatically. Hokage-sama, Hawk said, Bowing slightly, the girl is taking a bath. Kushina-san is helping her. No incidents since we left tea. Good. Minato exhaled quietly, letting some of the tension slip away. But one question still nagged at him. Tell me, Hawk, why did Kakashi ask for you to accompany him and the girl instead of Tiger? Hawk hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. I cannot speak for Hatake, but I imagine it was because Tiger forcefully knocked her out before bringing her in. Minato raised an eyebrow, his jaw tightening. And you? Do you think Kakashi made the right call? There was another pause, shorter this time. Tiger's methods wouldn't have been suitable in this situation. Minato's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. Understood. His voice remained calm, though the underlying tension was unmistakable. Thank you for your report. I'll need your full file on tonight's events by midday tomorrow. Hawk bowed slightly and disappeared into the night, leaving Minato standing close to the entrance of his home, staring at the stars again. When Minato stepped onto the porch, he found Kakashi sitting against the railing, staring out at the night, as still as a statue. The young ANBU didn't move, but Minato knew he was aware of his presence. For a moment, he just stood quietly, watching his former student. Kakashi didn't need prompting to talk, but he also didn't rush to explain things. Typical Kakashi. Minato eased down beside him. Neither said anything at first, the quiet stretching between them. It wasn't uncomfortable. It rarely was with Kakashi. He leaned back, enjoying the fleeting comfort of the still night. Eventually, though, curiosity got the better of him. So, Minato broke the silence, his tone carrying a hint of teasing. How exactly did you end up babysitting a girl who can't talk? Kakashi didn't react right away, continuing to stare at the yard as if the answers were hidden in the grass. After a quiet sigh, he spoke. I was on the rooftops, noticed something odd. Next thing I know, she's purring at me and forcing me into a game of tag. He stopped, realizing how ridiculous that sounded. Thought maybe she was. He interrupted himself again, realizing he was about to sound even more ridiculous. Never mind. A what? Minato prompted, his curiosity piqued. A ninja cat, Kakashi admitted with a deadpan tone, clearly resigned to how absurd the whole situation sounded. She moves like one. The purring, it's almost like my ninkin, but more feline. Minato blinked, holding back a laugh. Ninja cat? Really? Keep it together, Minato. Better not laugh so early in a conversation with Kakashi. So, she's like Pakin, but with less conversation? Minato managed to keep his face straight, but only barely. There it was, a small twitch at the corner of Kakashi's eye. For Kakashi, that was a full-on laugh. Well done, Minato. Kushina would be proud. What happened after that? Minato asked, suppressing a grin. You figured out she couldn't talk right away? Kakashi's gaze drifted back to the sky, his expression unreadable. It wasn't obvious at first, but once I tried a few things, gestures, basic hand signs, we managed to get some basic communication going. And then what? Taught her to talk, did you? Minato couldn't resist. Kakashi's head tilted slightly, his way of acknowledging the joke without reacting to it. She learns quickly. Picked up more words on the way here. Is that a compliment, Kakashi? Minato leaned forward, intrigued, but he could see Kakashi was not finished. She's smart, Kakashi admitted reluctantly, and it was probably the closest thing Minato would get to actual praise from him. Tested herself, and even began connecting words. Curious too. Every little thing she sees, she wants to know the name for it. Definitely a compliment. Coming from Kakashi, she is probably a fellow genius. Minato watched him carefully for a moment, reading between the lines. Kakashi was always good at keeping his feelings hidden, but there were small tells, things that only someone who really knew him could see. Smart and curious? Minato asked, his tone lighter than the question. But there was seriousness in the words. You think she's dangerous? Kakashi hesitated for just a moment, something Minato noticed immediately. Not dangerous, just unpredictable, Kakashi said. She picks things up fast, so she could be, but not yet. Minato nodded slowly. Unpredictable, huh? That could be difficult to deal with. Kakashi didn't respond right away, his gaze distant as he stared at the stars. I'll handle it. Minato smiled softly. Of course you will. She's not your responsibility, Kakashi, he said gently. Kakashi shifted slightly, his shoulders tensing in a subtle, familiar way. Ah, but he's already decided, hasn't he? Minato thought. He'll help her no matter what. He decided not to push further. Instead, Minato shifted the conversation. You had Hawk with you instead of Tiger. Why? Kakashi's gaze flickered, his tone darkening just a touch. Tiger, well, when the ANBU found us, she got defensive. I managed to calm her down, but Tiger didn't care. Just grabbed her, knocked her out. Minato's jaw clenched, though he stayed quiet. Hawks? Easier to work with, Kakashi continued, his tone flat, more factual than emotional. After a slight pause, he added, and I think she managed to charm him. Minato blinked, surprised. Charm him? Don't ask me how, Kakashi muttered, almost like he didn't want to talk about it. But she's got him. Soft spot. Kakashi's tone was telling. Ah, Kakashi, you're charmed too, aren't you? Minato smiled, but quickly hid his smile. Sounds like he's not the only one. Kakashi's posture stiffened, but he didn't reply. He didn't deny it either. Minato forward, watching him carefully. He knew Kakashi too well, but Minato wouldn't push him. Not tonight. She's interesting, Kakashi said finally, the closest to an admission he was going to get. Minato nodded, smiling to himself. Interesting, he repeated, his tone amused. I'll take that as high praise. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments before Minato spoke again, his tone more serious. You've done well so far, Kakashi. But remember, you don't have to handle everything on your own. Kakashi's body language shifted slightly, his usual resistance kicking in. Sure, he muttered, though the word lacked conviction. Minato rose to his feet, clapping Kakashi lightly on the shoulder. Get some rest. It's been a long day. As Minato turned to head back inside, he paused at the door and glanced over his shoulder. Oh, and Kakashi? Kakashi looked up, a silent question in his gaze. Good job. For a fleeting second, Kakashi's stoic expression softened, a flicker of something more vulnerable breaking through. It was gone almost as soon as it appeared, but Minato caught it. Kakashi didn't say anything, but Minato didn't need him to. He knows. With one last glance at the stars, Kakashi settled back against the porch, and Minato finally went inside. The comforting sight of Kushina bustling around the kitchen greeted him, the scent of freshly brewed tea filling the air. He smiled. Home. I'm home. Welcome back, Kushina replied with a bright smile, gliding over to greet him with a chaste kiss. Her touch was brief but grounding. I imagine you have a long night ahead of you. I made you some tea, you know? Minato felt the tension in his shoulders ease at her words. There was something about Kushina that could make the most complicated of problems seem just a little more manageable. He followed her into the kitchen, the weight of the day beginning to lift ever so slightly. He pulled out a chair and sat down, watching her move around the room, setting down a plate with some water in front of him. Thanks, Minato said, lifting the cup to his lips. I have some reading to do. I just hope it's light, he added with a small sigh, pausing for a moment before his tone became more serious. What do you think of the girl? Kushina's face lit up. She is a gem, so full of life. I haven't seen anyone enjoy my ramen as much as her. She placed a hand on her hip, giving him a playful look. You could learn a thing or two from her. Kushina launched into her recount of the evening, gesturing animatedly as she described the girl's excitement over the food, her curiosity about everything in the house. Minato couldn't help but smile lovingly at her as she talked. Looks like the girl charmed my wife too. Kushina's enthusiasm was infectious, even when Minato's thoughts remained tangled with the complexities of the situation. He was grateful for the lightness she brought to their home, especially now. The kettle whistled, and Kushina went to finish his tea. Oh, and you might want to stock up on Pocky tomorrow. She's obsessed. Got real possessive over the last one. Duly noted. Minato chuckled softly, picturing the scene. Pocky, her weakness. Noted. It was strange how normal this moment felt, given everything else. But that was Kushina for you, making even the oddest situations feel like home. Once Kushina was satisfied Minato had everything he needed, she kissed him goodnight and headed off to bed. He watched her go, a sense of warmth spreading through him. Somehow, even in the midst of all this, she makes everything feel manageable. Alone in the quiet of the house, Minato moved to his study, the soft flicker of the lamp lighting the room just enough for him to begin his work. He settled into his chair, flipping open the reports, the cup of tea warming his hands.